Unfortunately, I sold her during an economic slump in my family. If I'm not mistaken, this one is now the fourth one I have owned. My original one was purchased from a company called Sun Remarketing in Logan, Utah. I paid $1,095 for it in December 1989. After having to sell my last one, I have always regretted it, as I felt I should have one in my collection. It has always been my overall favorite. I was able to buy this one from another collector this past December, 20 years after purchasing my first one. I'd like to say a public thank you to Blair Ockery for making my current Lisa possible. He's a caring collector and he did a great job packing everything up and sending it to me. The Lisa started my journey into computer history. I was so fascinated with what I thought was just an older Big Mac. Learning about its history drew me into studying about the history of the Macintosh, then into the history of Apple, and later that grew into an interest in the overall history of personal computing, and then computing history in general. The Lisa, as a project, started at Apple in 1978, and over the next 4 years evolved into a business-class personal computer with a graphical user interface. The original Lisa, as put on paper, was to be sold for around $2,000, have a green phosphorus display, 16-bit microprocessor, and a high-capacity floppy drive. The system was to be ready for release in 1981. It was intended to be the company's successor to the Apple II. Steve Jobs wanted badly to run the project, but he was a tough manager, and a lot of engineers complained about him. Apple's executives were aware of this, and that's why they named John Couch to run the Lisa project, not Steve. Jeff Raskin was the manager of the much smaller and less known Macintosh project. Jeff Raskin knew of the work at Xerox PARC and suggested to Steve that he and some Lisa staff visit for inspiration. But Steve didn't like Jeff and didn't listen. It wasn't until Jeff mentioned the idea to Bill Atkinson and he urged Steve to go that they finally did. There are a number of misconceptions about the Apple Lisa and the different models. Now, not just related to the Apple Lisa, but no more within the story of the history of the Macintosh, enter misconception number one. That Apple sort of pushed their way into Xerox PARC and stole all of their ideas. Bill convinced Steve that the technology at PARC could really help Apple with a new perspective on computing for the 1980s. So Steve offered Xerox a great deal. This was just before Apple's public stock offering, so Xerox would be allowed to invest $1 million in Apple in exchange for 2 guided tours of their projects. Xerox knew this small investment would pay off for them shortly, so they happily agreed and gave Steve Jobs and a team of Lisa Projects engineers a tour. The Apple team was awestruck. They loved the graphical nature of the user interface with icons, the mouse, and the desktop metaphor. Steve Jobs suddenly knew that this was the future and scrapped everything that Lisa had been up to that moment. A few months later, after the visit, 20 PARC employees left and joined the Lisa team at Apple. With this, Steve especially pushed hard to take over the Lisa team, but when he was not allowed to, he went and took over the Macintosh project, forcing Jeff Raskin out of the picture. But that's another story. Let's talk about the machine itself now. The Apple Lisa was launched with much fanfare a year before the Macintosh on January 19, 1983. It sold for $9,995. That's almost like $22,000 today. This is misconception number 2, as you'll see people selling Lisa 2s on eBay and stating that they originally cost $10,000. No, just the original Lisa 1. It was the first commercially sold personal computer to have a GUI. It used a Motorola 68000 processor, like the Macintosh, but it only ran at 5 megahertz and not 8 megahertz like the Mac. It shipped with 1 megabyte of RAM. The Lisa shipped with a 5 megabyte profile hard drive and included the entire Lisa Office system: Lisa Write, Lisa Calc, Lisa Draw, Lisa Graph, Lisa Project, Lisa List, and Lisa Terminal. This suite was later renamed 7.7 in reference to the 7 supplied programs. And it kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Lisa Everything, and then went on to be Mac Write, Mac Draw. At the huge launch of the Macintosh a year later, on January 24, 1984, Lisa received its first hardware revision and became the Lisa 2. It was priced between $3,495 and $5,495. It dropped the Twiggy floppy drives in favor of a single 400K Sony micro floppy, like what the Macintosh has and what this Lisa 2 now has. An external profile and internal widget hard drive were available as standard options in different configurations. Let's take a look at the differences. With the introduction of Lisa 2, Apple also offered free upgrades to all Lisa 1 owners. That is why Lisa 1 is so much more rare. In April 1984, following the success of the Macintosh, Apple introduced MacWorks, a software emulation environment which allowed the Lisa to run Macintosh software. In January 1985, the Lisa 210, with the integrated 10 megabyte hard drive, was rebranded the Macintosh XL and was positioned as Apple's high-end Macintosh. The price was lowered again to $4,000. Apple's then CEO John Sculley has said that sales tripled, but Apple would have had to lose money to increase productivity to meet the new demands. Misconception number 3 is exactly what constitutes a Mac XL. They were nothing more than Lisa 210s, so really there's no difference. A Lisa 2 is a Mac XL, and vice versa. The confusion is caused by what happened to them after Apple discontinued the Macintosh XL in April 1985. In 1987, Sun Remarketing purchased about 5,000 Lisas and upgraded them. In 1989, Apple disposed of approximately 2,700 unsold Lisas in a landfill in Logan, Utah, in order to receive a tax write-off on the unsold inventory. To get back to the third misconception, many believe that a Mac XL is one that can outrun the Lisa OS. This isn't true. Sun Remarketing, where I purchased my first Lisa, did a lot of work to improve their product over the years. They created a screen modification kit to address a problem that Lisa had when running in Mac emulation mode. The Lisa had taller rectangular pixels, and the Mac had square ones. So Macintosh software displayed oddly, stretched out vertically on the Lisa. The screen modification changed the ROMs and corrected this issue, but made the modified Lisa unable to boot the Lisa OS forever after. Now let's take a look at my Lisa 2. I'm going to show you the insides and boot it up. I decided I'll open it up after I turn it on, since I already have it set up. So this is my current Lisa, and this is I'll show you the back, of course, in a moment. This is a Lisa 2, or it could have been a Lisa 2.5. In other words, it has no, actually let's do this. It has no internal hard drive, as Lisa 210s reference a built-in 10 megabyte hard drive in here. So this, someone could have purchased it without a profile, which would have been pretty silly because you couldn't have done anything with it. This profile, they look exactly the same, but this is actually a 10 megabyte hard drive because you can look at the model number A9M0100, and I don't remember the exact one for the 5 megabyte, but it has a 5 there instead of the 10 part or the 100. So as far as when this one was made, I don't know if this one necessarily came with a Lisa, at least not early on. Later on, I guess so. But my Lisa, after I purchased it and it got shipped, it won't boot anymore, so I'm working on trying to fix it. It does come on, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. I'm going to turn on the Lisa. The Lisa does have a floppy disk in it. So it's getting an error. So it's not seeing. Oh, this is a Macintosh program, because the last time I used it, I booted it to the Lisa diskette, then the MacWorks, and then this Infocom game. So you can see this profile's coming to a ready state. The last time I tried it, it would not boot. So I can tell it to try to start up from, this is the parallel card on the back, so it's plugged into the bottom, but this isn't ready. Oh, see, it's got an error sign on the profile. This is its initial boot screen where it goes through a check, CPU, memory, I/O, and then that's the parallel card. This looks like it's coming up to a ready state. Well, now it's blinking. But when I first got it, I tried a bunch of times, it would not boot.